Few days away now from the Wolverine, so let's celebrate that by talking about my personal favorite of the X-Men movies. X-Men First Class stars James McAvoy, Michael Fassbender, Rose Byrne, Kevin Bacon, Jennifer Lawrence, who else? January Jones, and just a bunch of other people. Oh yeah, and Jack from Jack the Giant Slayer. And this is basically another prequel of some sorts of the X-Men franchise, and basically this is about the beginnings of the school of the X-Men. It's how the X-Men were, created, hence the title First Class. And at the same time, it is basically how Professor X and Magneto were friends before, like the trailer and the poster said, before he was Professor X, he was Charles Xavier, and before he was Magneto, he was Eric Lenscher. It's about how they became friends and how they separated into becoming these sworn enemies. And I always thought that storyline of how they met and how they became enemies was something that really needed to be done in a movie. It couldn't just be done in flashbacks or something like that. It had to be done like a whole, full, complete movie. And I think that's because one of the things I always loved about the X-Men stories from the comics, the TV shows, and the movies and so forth was that relationship between Charles Xavier and Eric Lenscher. The whole idea that these two characters, they have such a mutual respect for one another, and yet at the same time they are sworn enemies, and that's something I always found really fascinating, and I always thought it was really cool to explore. Now this does have a different director though. This X-Men movie is directed by Matthew Vaughn. Bryan Singer was involved in this movie. He's a producer in X-Men First Class, and he actually was responsible for the story. But this is directed by Matthew Vaughn, and Matthew Vaughn, in my opinion, is a fantastic director because he clearly loves superheroes. Because he was going to direct Thor, he's directed Kick-Ass, and at one point it was actually the original choice for X-Men 3. He cast the actors, and according to him on the Blu-ray bonus features, he and the writers did a draft of X-Men 3. But he left 2 months before filming X-Men 3 because he felt that with such a quick prep time, he feared he wasn't able to make a good X-Men movie, and so he feels like now X-Men First Class is a second chance because he's had more experience, and he can now he now has developed his own style in movies and can put it into X-Men. And generally speaking, the fact that he along with Bryan Singer and along with this as the origin, this, in my opinion, makes the best X-Men movie. Yes, I love X-Men First Class. It's, in my opinion, is one of the best, not just the best X-Men movie, but also one of the best superhero movies of all time. I love it. It's just a really, really well acted, really well told movie, in my opinion. Like I said, this movie is about the beginnings of the X-Men, but at the same time, it is really also about the X-Men in the historical time that they are now stuck in the 60s, and you have the Cuban Missile Crisis at the same time. So the X-Men have to form together, and they got to stop nuclear war from happening. Which I got to say, that was a really cool idea. I think, I don't know whoever came up with that, but that is genius right there. It makes this movie work. The thing I felt this is making this the best X-Men yet is the cast. Every single actor in this movie I thought was just fantastic. The acting is phenomenal, and that comes from really great actors too. I mean, for starters, you have James McAvoy as the young Charles Xavier, and in my opinion, he's fantastic as him. He one of the things I really loved about his version of Charles Xavier in comparison to Patrick Stewart is that this is a really young Professor Xavier, so you really do see a different side of him. You see the party boy aspect of Professor Xavier. He's all drinking, having a good time. He's hitting on chicks, and he may be young, he may be a different Professor Xavier, but he's not so different that you don't recognize him as Professor Xavier because he does have that whole Professor Xavier intelligence and wisdom that we all come to know. And I really like McAvoy just in general because he's a good actor after all. And I thought, you know, he did a really great job as Professor X. Now, Michael Fassbender plays Eric Lyncher, aka Magneto, and Michael Fassbender has come a long way from being the guy in 300 who said, "We'll fight in the shade," and in this movie he was a fantastic Magneto, because I always felt that Magneto is like such an interestingly complex character, and this is really sort of the origin of how, you know, he does become the Magneto we all know and love. And, you know, he's just really cool. I mean, Fassbender's Magneto, he's charming, he's funny, but he's so, like, you know, he's so dangerous, and he's such a psychopath at the very end of the movie. It's just, you're just like, you know, this dude means business, because he's on a quest for revenge after all. So he's like torturing people, he's like pulling people's teeth out, and he takes like knives to people's hands and so forth. He's really pissed off, and it really shows like the beginning stages of him as the villain. And you know, generally speaking, like, you know, the relationship between him and Charles Xavier, I really liked it though. I really liked the fact that you really do get both their sides of how you know mutants are within society, and you really do understand both of them. In fact, one of the things I felt with Ian McKellen as Magneto, because I do like Ian McKellen's Magneto, but I always saw Ian McKellen's Magneto just as just a crazy evil villain. And Fassbender's take on Magneto is that, you know, you really do understand his point of view. You really do see, you know, why he does hate humans, and you know, and you really do. You kind of like, you know, agreeing with him, and you really do empathize with him. And I think that's the true testament of a fantastic actor. I felt they did a great job with casting Fassbender as Magneto. And the other supporting cast, I thought really did a good job. Like Jennifer Lawrence, you know, Katniss from the Hunger Games, she plays Mystique, and I really liked her as Mystique. I think the thing that makes Mystique good in this movie that you know, because I thought Rebecca Romijn was okay in the other X-Men movies, but this Mystique feels like a real character. Like you do understand, you know, the arc that she's going through, and you see kind of like, you know, the person that she is at the beginning of the movie, where she's so insecure and hates herself, towards the very end of the movie where she's, you know, cool and she's accepted herself. You know what I mean? And you know, this movie really made Mystique such a relatable and you know, understanding character. And on top of that, the rest of the cast in this movie is really cool too. I mean, like, you have Jack from Jack the Giant Slayer playing Beast. I thought he was a good job as Beast. He does have the intellectual side, but he can go, you know, apeshit crazy. You know what I mean? And you know, the rest of the cast, like, you know, Havoc is good, Banshee is good. You know, Rose Byrne as Moira McTaggart, I thought was pretty good. You know, just this whole cast is just fantastic, and we haven't even gotten to the villain yet, Sebastian Shaw, who's played by Kevin Bacon. Now, whenever you hear Kevin Bacon in a movie, you instantly go, he's playing the bad guy, isn't he? You know, it's kind of obvious at this point, but you're just so cool with it. And Kevin Bacon was awesome as the villain, though. He's just so relentless and yet so charming at the same time. He's kind of like he's kind of like Hugh Hefner in his prime, because, you know, Sebastian Shaw's got all of these, you know, these big luxurious, you know, places and yachts and everything like that. He's kind of like Hugh Hefner in that way. Well, if you only, you know, Hugh Hefner in his prime, and if Hugh Hefner was a mutated psychopath, basically. You know, he was just really cool, and I like the fact that they did a completely different villain this time, because generally speaking, before First Class, they'd done just, you know, two villains as the main villain. It's either been Magneto or William Stryker, and I kind of felt like we were getting really tired of that. I'm like, well, there's tons of X-Men villains, you know, you can go with Apocalypse, you can go with Mr. Sinister, you know, and Days of Future Past are doing Trask, you know what I mean? So now, you know, they've gone for a completely different villain. And at one point, you're watching this movie going, he's like the Magneto before Magneto. That's awesome. You know, he has that sort of personality, and I felt Bacon did a good job as the villain. Same with January Jones as Emma Frost. A lot of people say, "Oh, January Jones is a little miscast," and you know, blah blah blah. I'm just like, well, yeah, she did a good job though. I'm not saying she was bad. I'm just saying she was good. I mean, she does have the whole Emma Frost ice cold, you know, personality type of vibe to her. You know what I mean? The tone of this movie is really cool. It's, you know, it takes place in the 1960s, and apparently, sorry about that. Apparently, Matthew Vaughn must be a big fan of the 1960s Bond films because it has that whole, you know, Sean Connery Bond type of vibe going on. Because it's basically X-Men with spy espionage. I'm like, that's really cool. You know, we haven't seen that before in the X-Men franchise, and it pretty much works in this movie because I think because it takes place in the Cuban Missile Crisis, and you know, mutants are getting discovered, they probably would be seen as like government agents first before, you know, before they became these outlawed superheroes. You know what I mean? So that's a pretty cool, you know, concept in my opinion. You know, and the score is by Henry Jackman, by the way, and it's fantastic. You know what I mean? It's feels like it feels very sort of, you know, superhero traditional, but at the same time it feels very modern. It's cool that they could, you know, blend those together because the music is just, you know, awesome. Like, you know, the X-Men theme is really cool. The Magneto theme is just great though. It sounds big and threatening, and it sounds kind of like how I'd want, you know, Magneto's theme to be. It's just it's awesome. In fact, there's this cool little way to view the movie on the Blu-ray, which is just the soundtrack only with the score playing all the way through. And if you haven't, man, I suggest you do that because it's really cool, and it makes you want to get the soundtrack. I did. I got the soundtrack. The soundtrack's phenomenal. You know what I mean? So yeah, I mean, Henry Jackman just did an awesome job. I'm sounding redundant now. Yeah. One of the gripes I've heard about this movie is that, you know, people first of all, like the bigger X-Men fans than me, are all like, well, it doesn't, you know, follow the First Class story, and at first I was like that too, but then I heard, you know, the official statements from the producers and director and the writers, and they all said, well, we tried doing the original First Class approach though, because in the original First Class comics it was all about young Beast, young Storm, young Jean Grey, young Cyclops, and all that stuff, and they said, well, it was too much like Twilight and we didn't want to do that, and plus we wanted to show people New Mutants. And I stand by that statement too. I think, you know, we do need to see New Mutants. We can't, you know, there's just a bunch out there, you know what I mean? And you know, you can't just get stuck with the old mutants. You've got to venture out and get new ones. And I feel like that it works right here. I really do think so. Even though it does kind of mess up with some of the continuity of the comics, I still feel like it works in a way. You know what I mean? And another gripe I've heard, you know, fans of the X-Men movies have had on this movie is that they're all like, well, is this really a prequel or is it a reboot? You know, they don't know how to pick. And I've heard a lot of people justify, oh, it's a prequel because they show the scene of Magneto bending the gate again and so forth, and they'll say, oh no, it's a reboot because these events, you know, clearly contradict the events in like X-Men 3 or X-Men Origins Wolverine and so forth. And my theory is that it's kind of like the Rise of the Planet of the Apes movie, how, you know, it was a prequel to the Planet of the Apes movies, but at the same time, it did negate certain events in the Planet of the Apes, series, and it kind of was its own thing. Not to, so I guess it's a prequel reboot in a sense. Just, you know, I guess it's a preboot, as I'll call it, though. And not to mention, though, you know, the next X-Men movie is Days of Future Past, and they are going to do time travel, so they can fix certain events in the X-Men franchise, and the corrections will then make sense, I guess. If there's any gripes I personally had with this movie is that, you know, some of the things I was hoping they would explain in this movie a little bit thoroughly. They're kind of explaining like 1 sense or 2 senses, and I can understand that though. This is a complex movie, and a lot of things do happen in this film, so they have to they're forced to explain things really quickly. Like the whole thing with Magneto's helmet, like Sebastian Shaw just takes the helmet out and goes, "Oh, the Russians made me this," and they just move on to the next scene. And I was like, well, couldn't you explain a little bit more? Can you explain how it blocks telepathy or something? I don't know. I mean, it's just a little nitpick I had, but anyways, X-Men First Class is without doubt one of my favorite X-Men movies of all time. It's well casted, it's well acted, it's got great effects, by the way, and great action, and it didn't just save the X-Men franchise, it took it to a whole new level, you know what I mean? And that's why it got me so excited for the Wolverine. And for that, I'm gonna give X-Men First Class an A-. It's my favorite of the X-Men franchise, and I absolutely love it. And if you were to ask me what was my favorite movie 2011, I would say it's X-Men First Class. It's definitely one of my favorite superhero movies of all time. If I ever do a top 10 superhero movie list, it'll probably be like number 5 or number 4 on the list. I love it that much. So yeah, those are my thoughts on X-Men First Class. We are now close to the Wolverine. I'm excited. And yeah, so what are your thoughts on X-Men First Class? What do you want to see? What character from First Class do you want to see more in Days of Future Past, since they are bringing the majority of the First Class cast back? So, tell me, man. And yeah. So, catch my Wolverine review in the coming days. So, see ya.